Robert Yates wrote one of his most famous poems, The Second Coming, in the aftermath of the First World War, which is true. He wrote the poem in 1919, but there's so much more happening in the world then. Notably, for Yates, 1919 was the height of the Spanish flu pandemic. During that horrible time, a third of the world's population was infected and over 50 million people died. The Spanish flu was particularly deadly among pregnant women, 70% of whom would succumb to the virus. Yates's own wife, Georgie Hyde Lees, caught the virus while she was pregnant with their daughter Anne. Thankfully, Georgie survived, and it was during her recovery that Yates wrote the poem, which includes these haunting lines. Things fall apart. The center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. The blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The poem ends with this vision of a lion-bodied monster with a human head roused from sleep, quote, vexed to nightmare by a rocking cradle. And so Yates asks, and what rough beast, its hour come round at last, slouches toward Bethlehem to be born? The poem kind of circles in my head this time of year, and also in this time in human history, as we live in a time where things have fallen apart. Our children, missing trick-or-treating and Christmas pageants and prom, have lost a piece of their innocence. We see in the news a total breakdown in communication between political ideologies. Our planet is warming. The center does not hold. And yet the question that we cling to is whether or not this too will be a time of God's revelation. Will God reveal herself to her people again or not? Of course, things have fallen apart before. In the year 70 of the Common Era, about 40 years after Jesus' death, the Roman army laid siege to Jerusalem for 5 months before finally sacking the city and destroying the temple. In today's reading, Jesus predicts this tragedy. Now, most scholars believe that Mark pens this gospel during or immediately after the war, which ended in the fall of Jerusalem. When we read these stories at the end of the gospel, remembering that Mark's gospel is only 16 chapters long, and we just read from chapter 13. When we read these stories, we can almost smell the burning buildings and hear the massive temple stones crash. You can feel the panic of losing the center of your world, feel the earth shake. You can almost know the pain of 5 months' hunger and know what it is to cry until you dehydrated yourselves or to lose your mind in worry. When Mark writes this gospel, his audience knows they lived these terrifying moments. And so it really means something to have Jesus say, look, all of this is going away and terrible things are going to happen. It really means something to hear Jesus say, keep alert, pay attention, be aware. But all of this is also a reminder not to lose our heads. Change is coming, even tragedy. And in some places it is already here, so don't lose your cool. Keep your eyes on the prize. This is not the end. Now, we call these texts apocalyptic literature. And in our culture, apocalypse has come to mean something like the great cataclysm at the end of days. But really, apocalypse means revelation. That is, the disclosure of great knowledge. Something is being revealed. Often, apocalyptic literature is simply chasing the rabbit down the hole. If you continue to behave in this way, this is what's going to happen. Apocalyptic literature is an awful lot like parenting, I've I mean, more seriously, these are visions of what happens, for example, if we do not curb the human impacts of global climate change, or if we do not actively work for an egalitarian society, an equitable society. Those sorts of visions would be apocalyptic. When we encounter apocalypses in the Bible, our aching question is, where is God in all of this? How is God revealed in this? How can this total destruction be a part of the good news of Jesus Christ, the Son of God, as Mark introduces his gospel? And how can all of this, and now I mean climate change and COVID-19 and 5 million deaths worldwide and violence and hate and war and on and on and on, how can God be in all of this mess? In the messes of our own lives, which might seem trivial to some when they're held up against the problems of the world, but when I experience them in real time, in my life, sometimes they do feel like the great cataclysm at the end of days. The waiting for news, awful diagnosis, the test result, the treatment, waiting for a quarantine to end, or for the funeral to be held. Where is God in all of this? How is God revealed even here? Our longing joins us to Mark's ancient audience as they sifted through the rubble of Jerusalem, as they smelled the lingering stench of death and destruction. Surely they asked, where is God in all this? As Jesus predicts everything that happened, you can see Mark's audience lean in. You can feel their longing for a God revealed to them from the midst of the rubble. In this gospel, Jesus spends his final breath in a loud cry of lamentation, saying, my God, why have you forsaken me? Where are you in this mess? In the moment of Jesus' death, Mark actually leaves Golgotha and returns to the Temple Mount, to the sanctuary, to the Holy of Holies, to the center of life in Jerusalem, and Jews believed of life on earth, and there the temple curtain was torn in two. To a broken people, Mark writes of everything that broke them. The center does not hold. What then is God's great revelation? How does God reveal God's very self to us? A broken body? A broken curtain? A broken city? A broken people? As soon as that curtain rips, Mark swiftly returns the action back to the cross, and there a soldier confesses, surely this man was God's son. That is God in the mess. God is in the brokenness, in the rending, in the rubble. God is in all of these things because being in and with these things is how God redeems them. Methodist pastor and artist Jan Richardson says that when Jesus gets all doom and gloom like this, he is inviting us into a practice of apocalypse. She writes, he calls us in each day and moment to do the things that will stir up our courage and keep us grounded in God, not only that we may perceive Christ when he comes, but also that we may recognize him even now. This is the reality in which we baptize. Beloved, we long for the revelation, for the revealing of our God. Advent approaches. And Advent, as it turns out, is just another word for revelation, just another word for apocalypse. Historically, it was a 7-week affair, and these November texts were a part of it. This week I was informed by some in our community that as far as they were concerned, life is Advent, save for Christmas and Easter and maybe a few other reprieves here and there. What truth? Life-altering cataclysms are happening every day, and we long to see God in their midst. Our hearts ache, wondering, where is God in this mess? And the answer is, God is here, at the center, not as cause, but as companion and as cure.